Step away from the vehicle. Now. The sheriff's voice sliced through the late afternoon air like it owned the place, sharp enough to stop conversations mid-sentence and pull every eye toward pump number 4 where Jada Sterling stood beside a black SUV, one hand resting lightly on the gas nozzle, the other hanging relaxed at her side, as if none of this surprised her at all. The digital meter ticked upward, $42.17, $42.18. Steady, indifferent, while the man in uniform approached with the kind of confidence that didn't come from facts, only assumption, his boots slow, deliberate, his gaze already decided before a single word of proof had been spoken, and around them the quiet hum of a normal afternoon shifted into something tighter, something charged, like the air just before a storm breaks over open highway. Jada didn't turn immediately, didn't rush, didn't explain. She simply finished the motion she had already started, easing the nozzle back into place with care. Click, precise, controlled. Then she looked at him. Not up, not down, but straight through. The kind of eye contact that unsettles people who expect fear and find none. And for a second, just a second, the sheriff hesitated, though he would never admit it, because there was something about her stillness that didn't match the story forming in his mind. License and registration, he said, louder now, louder than necessary, as if volume could fill the gap where certainty should have been. And a couple near the convenience store door slowed their steps. A teenager by the ice freezer lifted his phone just slightly, not filming yet, but ready, while a truck idled 2 pumps over, engine rumbling low like background noise to something about to unfold. Jada reached into her jacket pocket, slow, deliberate, no sudden movements, no resistance, just control, always control. But instead of handing anything over, she paused, her fingers brushing against her phone, her expression unchanged, calm in a way that didn't ask permission, calm in a way that suggested this moment had already played out somewhere else before. Maybe not here, maybe not today, but enough times to recognize the pattern, the tone, the assumption hidden behind the badge. The sheriff stepped closer, narrowing the space, his shadow cutting across the side of the SUV as he glanced at the vehicle, then back at her, connecting dots that were never there to begin with. This car come back to you? He pressed, voice edged with something sharper now, something that carried past her and into the ears of everyone pretending not to listen, and a whisper drifted from somewhere behind. That's not her car. Soft, careless, enough to tilt the moment further off balance. Jada's lips parted slightly, not to argue, not to defend, but to breathe, measured, steady, as if she were timing something unseen. And when she finally spoke, her voice didn't rise to meet his, didn't mirror his tension, it cut through it instead, quiet but exact. Is there a reason you stopped me, officer? And that question, simple on the surface, landed heavier than anything shouted so far, because it forced something he wasn't ready to give. Justification. And for a brief second, the rhythm broke. The scene hung suspended between what he thought he knew and what he couldn't yet prove, and Jada Sterling stood there, unmoved, like the center of something much bigger than a routine stop, something the sheriff hadn't realized he had just stepped into. The sheriff did not answer right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to make the people watching lean in a little closer, like they were waiting for something to snap into place. But instead of clarity, it only fed his certainty, because in his mind hesitation did not mean doubt. It meant control, and he took another step forward, closing the gap, as if proximity alone could turn suspicion into truth. His eyes scanning Jada again from head to toe, taking in the simple jacket, the clean sneakers, the absence of anything that matched the version of ownership he expected to see. And that was all he needed to reinforce the story he had already decided to tell. I asked you a question, he said, voice firmer now, louder again, projecting authority not just to her, but to the small crowd that had begun to form around the pumps and the storefront windows. This vehicle was reported circling this area twice in the last 20 minutes, and now I find you here filling it up like nothing is wrong. And there it was, the narrative, built quickly, loosely, but with enough confidence to sound real to anyone who was not paying close attention. Jada listened without interruption, her posture unchanged, shoulders relaxed, chin level, as if she were hearing something predictable rather than alarming. And in that stillness, there was a quiet shift, subtle but undeniable. Like the center of gravity in the moment was no longer where the sheriff thought it was. A man near the ice freezer finally raised his phone all the way, recording now, not hiding it anymore, while the couple by the door exchanged a glance that said they were no longer sure what they were witnessing, and the low murmur of assumption began to fracture into uncertainty. I am going to need you to step away from the vehicle and place your hands where I can see them. The sheriff continued, each word deliberate, practiced, the kind of phrasing that turned a situation into procedure whether it belonged there or not. But Jada did not move, not because she was refusing, but because she was choosing, and there was a difference he could not read. Instead, she slowly reached into her pocket again, this time pulling out her phone, her movements measured, visible, controlled in a way that made it impossible to label them as threatening. And for a brief moment the sheriff's expression tightened, not fear, not yet, but something closer to irritation, because control was slipping in ways he could not quite define. "Ma'am, I would advise you not to make this more complicated than it needs to be," he said, and the word advise carried weight he expected her to feel. But Jada only glanced at the screen for a second before lifting her eyes back to him, steady, unwavering, as if she were looking past the badge and into something much smaller behind it. "I am not the one making this complicated," she replied, her voice even, clear enough to carry but never raised, and that contrast, that refusal to match his tone, began to unsettle the edges of the scene, because power that does not announce itself tends to feel heavier than power that does. The sheriff exhaled sharply, shifting his stance, his hand brushing briefly against his belt in a gesture meant to reinforce authority without escalating it, and he turned slightly toward the growing audience as if to gather support from their presence. "Folks, just give us a little space here," he called out, but no one moved. Not really, because curiosity had already rooted them in place, and once people start watching, they rarely choose to look away. Jada's phone lit softly in her hand, her thumb tapping once, then twice, a motion so small it could have gone unnoticed if everything else had not already slowed down around it. And for a split second her gaze dropped, not in submission, not in distraction, but in calculation, like she was aligning something invisible into position. "Last time," the sheriff said, his patience thinning, "step away from the vehicle." And this time the command hung in the air heavier than before, because now it was not just about the car. It was about being obeyed, about maintaining a version of control that was beginning to feel less certain with every passing second. Jada finally took a step, but not back, not away, just slightly to the side, enough to shift the angle between them, enough to change the dynamic without breaking it. And as she did, she lifted the phone to her ear, her voice low, precise, almost too calm for the moment it was entering. "Yes," she said, and then paused just long enough to let the next words land exactly where they needed to. "I am at the location now." And whatever came next, whatever had just been set in motion, did not show on her face. But something in the air responded, something subtle, something that made even the sheriff hesitate for half a heartbeat without understanding why. The sheriff's eyes narrowed the moment Jada lifted the phone to her ear, not because the action itself was unusual, but because of how she did it, calm, unhurried, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond his reach, and that confidence pressed against his authority in a way he could not ignore. So he stepped forward again, voice sharper now, trying to reclaim the center of the moment. "Who are you calling?" he demanded, the question less about information and more about control. But Jada did not answer him directly. She simply turned slightly away, just enough to signal that the conversation she had entered carried more weight than the one he was trying to force, and that subtle shift landed harder than any defiance could have. The people watching felt it too, even if they could not explain it. The teenager filming adjusted his grip, focusing closer. The couple near the door no longer whispering but openly staring now, while a man leaning against a pickup truck crossed his arms, his expression changing from casual curiosity to something more attentive, like he was beginning to question the story he had accepted only moments ago. "You are not going to ignore me," the sheriff said, louder again, his tone pushing against the edges of patience. "This is an active investigation." And the words sounded official, structured, but they hung in the air without the foundation they needed, because nothing about Jada's presence fit the urgency he was trying To project. Jada listened to the voice on the other end of the call, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, and when she spoke again, her words were quiet but precise. Confirmed, she said, followed by a brief pause. And then, yes, he is still here. And that sentence, simple as it was, shifted something invisible in the space between them, because it reframed the moment in a way no one had expected, not even the sheriff, who frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face before he masked it with irritation. "Ma'am, I am giving you a lawful order," he said, emphasizing each word as if repetition could solidify authority. "Step away from the vehicle and end that call immediately." But even as he spoke, there was a trace of uncertainty threading through his voice, something small but noticeable, like a crack forming under pressure. Jada lowered the phone just slightly, not ending the call, not complying, just adjusting her hold, and then she looked at him again, directly, fully, and for the first time there was something different in her gaze, not defiance, not anger, but recognition, like she had reached the exact point she had been waiting for. "You might want to listen," she said, her tone still even, still controlled, but carrying a weight that did not need volume to be felt, and the sheriff opened his mouth to respond, ready to dismiss it, ready to reassert himself. But before he could, the radio clipped to his shoulder crackled to life, the sudden burst of static cutting through the moment like a signal breaking through interference. He reached for it instinctively, pressing the button. "Go ahead," he said, his voice shifting automatically into a more formal cadence. And for a second there was only static again. Then a voice came through, low, measured, unmistakably official, though the words were not yet clear enough for anyone else to understand. And the sheriff's expression changed, just slightly at first, his posture tightening, his focus narrowing as he listened. Really listened now, not to Jada, not to the crowd, but to something coming through that radio that he had not expected. Around them, the air shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like the direction of the wind changing before anyone feels the temperature drop. And the people watching leaned in without realizing it, sensing that whatever was happening was no longer following the script they thought they understood. Jada remained exactly where she was, phone still in her hand, her presence steady, anchored, as if she had already stepped beyond this moment while everyone else was just beginning to catch up. And when the sheriff finally spoke again, pulling the radio slightly away from his ear, his voice was different, not weaker, not yet, but no longer absolute. "Repeat that," he said into the receiver, and the silence that followed was no longer empty. It was loaded, waiting, as the truth edged closer to the surface whether he was ready for it or not. The sheriff held the radio closer this time, pressing it tighter against his ear as if proximity could change what he was hearing. But the voice on the other end did not repeat immediately, and that brief delay stretched the moment thin, exposing something underneath his authority that had not been visible before. Uncertainty, subtle but real, and for the first time since he stepped onto that concrete, he was no longer the one controlling the pace of what was happening. "Dispatch, say again," he said, his tone sharper now, but edged with something less certain. And when the response came through, clearer this time, lower, more deliberate, it did not need to be loud to carry weight. And although the exact words were still partially lost to the surrounding noise, the effect was immediate, visible in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the way his gaze shifted not toward Jada but slightly downward, inward, processing, around them. The small crowd had grown still, the earlier murmurs, replaced by a quiet tension that felt heavier than any accusation, because now people were not just watching a situation unfold, they were sensing a shift in power, even if they could not yet name it. And the teenager recording lowered his phone just a fraction, not stopping, but focusing harder, as if he understood instinctively that this was the moment something real would surface. Jada did not move. She did not speak. She simply stood there, phone still in her hand, her presence steady, almost detached, like she had already seen the outcome play out and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. And that stillness, that refusal to rush, became louder than anything the sheriff could say. "Ma'am," he started again, but the word came out differently this time, less forceful, more cautious, as if he was testing the ground beneath him before taking another step. "Who exactly are you speaking with?" and the question landed softer than before, stripped of its earlier certainty, because now it was not just a demand, it was a request for clarity he suddenly needed. Jada glanced at him briefly, not dismissing him, not challenging him, just acknowledging his presence like one acknowledges something temporary. And then she lifted the phone slightly, her voice calm. Precise. They are asking you to listen carefully, she said. And those words did not sound like a suggestion. They sounded like a transition, like the moment just before a door opens and everything on the other side becomes impossible to ignore. The sheriff hesitated, then slowly raised the radio again, pressing it to his ear. And this time he did not speak right away, he just listened. And whatever came through now was clear enough, heavy enough, because his expression shifted again more noticeably this time, the edges of his confidence pulling inward, replaced by something tighter, something controlled but no longer dominant. A man near the pickup truck let out a quiet breath he did not realize he was holding, while the couple by the door exchanged another look, this one sharper, more certain, because the story they had assumed was beginning to fall apart in front of them, piece by piece, without anyone needing to argue it. The sheriff lowered the radio slowly, his hand lingering on it for a second longer than necessary, as if letting go meant accepting something he was not ready to face. And when he finally looked back at Jada, the space between them felt different, not physically, but in weight, in direction, like the balance had shifted, and he could feel it even if he did not understand it yet. There seems to be some confusion, he said, and the words sounded formal, controlled, but they did not carry the same authority as before, because now they were not shaping the situation, they were reacting to it, and that difference was unmistakable. Jada's expression did not change, but there was a subtle narrowing in her gaze, not aggressive, not confrontational, just precise, like she was measuring the exact moment when silence would no longer be necessary. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, cutting through the stillness with a clarity that made several people glance toward it instinctively. And the voice that followed was no longer muffled, no longer uncertain. It was direct, unmistakable, carrying a tone that did not ask for interpretation, and whatever it said, whatever instruction it delivered, it landed hard enough that the sheriff's posture shifted in response, his stance adjusting slightly, his shoulders no longer squared with the same certainty. And for the first time, he did not question, complied with every request, waited for logic to correct the moment. But logic had not come, only dismissal, only a look that stayed longer than it should have. And that memory did not make her angry now. It made her precise. The present returned without warning, sharp and immediate, and the sheriff was still there, still holding the radio, still processing something he could not undo. And the people around them had shifted again, not physically, but in attention, because now they were no longer watching a woman being questioned. They were watching a man losing certainty, and that change carried weight. A woman near the entrance of the store spoke quietly to the person beside her. Something is off, and the words were not loud, but they traveled, threading through the small crowd like a current that redirected thought. The sheriff cleared his throat, a small sound but noticeable in the stillness, and adjusted his stance, trying to reassemble the authority that had begun to slip. We are just going to verify a few things, he said, his voice measured, controlled, but missing the edge it had carried before, because now it was no longer setting the tone, it was trying to recover it. Jada watched him, not with defiance, not with triumph, but with clarity, the kind that comes from recognizing a pattern at the exact moment it begins to break, and she took a slow breath, steady, deliberate, grounding herself not in the tension around her, but in something deeper, something practiced. Her phone remained in her hand, the line still open, the connection still active, and though no one else could hear what was being said on the other end, its presence was felt, like an unseen force shaping the direction of the moment. The sheriff glanced briefly at the SUV again, then back at her, as if trying to confirm something that no longer aligned with what he was experiencing. And for the first time his question came out without volume, without projection, almost uncertain. This vehicle is registered to you? And the difference in tone did not go unnoticed, not by Jada, not by the people watching, because it marked a shift from accusation to inquiry, from assumption to doubt. Jada did not answer immediately, not because she could not, but because timing mattered, and she had learned long ago that the moment You choose to speak is often more powerful than what you say. And so she let the silence sit for just a second longer, letting the weight of everything unsaid press into the space between them. The radio in the sheriff's hand crackled again, sharper this time, the voice on the other end cutting through with unmistakable clarity, and whatever it delivered, whatever confirmation or instruction it carried, it landed in a way that changed his posture completely, subtle but undeniable, like a line had been drawn that he could not step across anymore. His eyes flicked to Jada again, but this time there was no assumption in them, no immediate judgment, only recognition forming, incomplete but inevitable, and in that exact moment Jada lowered her phone slightly, not ending the call, just shifting it, and her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and final in a way that did not need emphasis. "You should listen carefully," she said, and the words did not challenge him, they positioned him, placing him exactly where he needed to be to understand what was coming next, because the truth was no longer approaching, it was arriving. The sheriff's fingers tightened slightly around the radio as the voice on the other end came through again, clearer now, sharper, no longer something he could reinterpret or brush aside. And this time everyone could hear at least part of it, the tone if not every word, firm, controlled, carrying a level of authority that did not belong to local routine. And that alone shifted the entire atmosphere of the gas station without a single step being taken. "Confirm identity immediately," the voice said, and even though it was not directed at the crowd, it echoed outward, settling into the space like a command that did not need to be repeated, and the sheriff's posture adjusted almost instantly, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the change, the subtle lowering of certainty, the recalibration of control. He glanced at Jada again. This time, he asked. There was something in his tone that suggested he already understood the answer would not favor him. Jada lowered the phone just slightly, enough to speak clearly, but not enough to disconnect from whatever authority was present on the other end, and her eyes remained steady, locked on him with the same calm precision that had never wavered since the moment he approached. "You have already been told," she said, her voice even, controlled, but carrying a finality that left no space for reinterpretation, and that sentence did more than respond. It positioned him, placed him inside a situation he no longer defined. The people around them felt it too, the shift from uncertainty to something closer to realization, and the teenager recording took a small step closer without meaning to, drawn in by the tension that no longer felt like escalation but like exposure. While the man by the pickup truck uncrossed his arms slowly, his expression no longer skeptical but attentive in a different way, as if he had just recognized that what he was witnessing was not what it first appeared to be. The sheriff lifted the radio again, but this time his movement was slower, more deliberate, and when he spoke into it, his voice carried a formality that had not been there before. "Unit on site requesting confirmation," he said, each word measured, controlled, and the response came back almost immediately, clear, direct, leaving no room for doubt. And whatever was said next, whatever identification was confirmed, it landed with enough force that his entire stance shifted, not dramatically, but fundamentally, like a structure adjusting to a new foundation. His eyes returned to Jada, and for the first time there was no assumption left in them, only recognition forming, incomplete, but undeniable. And in that moment the dynamic between them reversed without a single raised voice, without a single step backward or forward, just a quiet transfer of weight that everyone present could feel even if they could not fully explain it. Jada ended the call then, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a simple motion, a tap of her thumb, and she slipped the phone back into her pocket with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning, as if the action itself was routine, expected, already accounted for. "Is there anything else you need to verify?" she asked, her voice steady, not confrontational, not defensive, just clear, and that question did not challenge him. It closed the gap, forcing the moment to settle into what it had become. The sheriff opened his mouth slightly, then stopped, the words he might have used earlier no longer fitting the reality in front of him. And for a second, he simply stood there, processing, recalculating, aware now that the situation had moved beyond his initial control, beyond his initial assumptions. The radio crackled one more time, softer now but still present, A reminder that the authority guiding this moment was no longer centered on him. And the people watching shifted again, not in position but in perception, because now they were no longer witnessing suspicion. They were witnessing correction, the quiet unraveling of something that had been built too quickly and without foundation. Jada remained where she was, composed, grounded, her presence unchanged, but the space around her had transformed, and the sheriff, standing just a few feet away, finally understood that he was no longer leading this interaction. He was responding to it, and that realization settled into the silence between them like the final piece of something that had been moving toward this point from the very beginning. The silence after her question did not feel empty. It felt final, like something had already been decided, and the only thing left was for it to be acknowledged. And the sheriff stood there with that realization settling into him slowly, not all at once, but enough that his next breath came differently, measured, careful, as if he were stepping into unfamiliar ground without wanting to admit it. The people around them did not move, but their attention sharpened, focused now in a way that carried expectation rather than curiosity, because they could sense that the moment had reached its edge, the point where something would shift completely. Jada Sterling did not rush it. She did not fill the silence. She let it stretch just long enough to make the weight of everything undeniable. And then she took a single step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just deliberate, closing a distance that no longer belonged to him. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, precise, and absolute, in a way that did not need to rise. "You initiated a stop based on assumption," she said, each word landing clean, controlled. "You escalated. Without verification. Another step, small but intentional. And you continued after being advised to listen." And with that, she reached into her jacket, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the same measured control she had shown from the beginning, and she produced a small leather case. Dark, simple, official. She opened it just enough for him to see, not flashing it, not presenting it for the crowd, but positioning it exactly where it needed to be, between them, in his line of sight, and the effect was immediate, unmistakable. The sheriff's eyes dropped to it, focused, and for a second everything else around them seemed to fall away. The murmurs, the phones, the distant hum of engines, all of it muted by the recognition settling in front of him. Because what he was looking at was not something he could question, not something he could reinterpret. It was authority that operated above his own, clear, structured, undeniable. Jada held it there for exactly as long as necessary, no longer, no shorter, then closed it and slipped it back into her jacket with the same calm precision. And when she spoke again, there was no need to explain further, no need to justify. "Special Agent Jada Sterling," she said, her tone even, grounded, "Federal Bureau of Investigation." And the words did not echo, they settled, heavy, final, reshaping the entire space in an instant. The sheriff did not move at first, not because he could not, but because his body needed a moment to align with what his mind had just accepted. And in that pause, the balance of the situation shifted completely, not visibly, not dramatically, but fundamentally, like a structure realigning under new weight. The teenager filming lowered his phone slightly, his expression no longer curious but stunned, while the couple near the door exchanged a look that said everything without words. Because the story they thought they were watching had just been replaced by something else entirely. The sheriff straightened slightly, not in authority this time, but in response, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled but different, stripped of assumption, shaped now by recognition. "Agent Sterling," he said, and even that felt like an adjustment, like he was testing the reality of it as he said it out loud. Jada met his gaze without change, without triumph, without anger, just clarity, the kind that does not need to prove itself. And in that stillness, there was a quiet statement more powerful than anything spoken, because she had not raised her voice. She had not resisted. She had not needed to. She had simply allowed the truth to arrive on its own terms. The radio at his shoulder crackled again, softer now, almost like confirmation of what had already been made clear, and he reached for it instinctively. But this time the movement was different, not commanding, not assertive, just responsive, and around them the air settled, the tension no longer building but resolving, piece by piece. Jada took a slow breath, steady, controlled, and for the first time since the moment began, the situation no longer felt like something unfolding. It felt like something concluded, not because she had forced it, but because she had never needed to, and as she stood there, composed, grounded, the truth was no longer approaching. It was fully present, and everyone there, including the sheriff, could feel it, without needing another word. The words did not echo, but their impact moved outward anyway, settling into every corner of the gas station like a quiet shockwave. And for a moment no one spoke, not because they were unsure, but because they had just witnessed something undeniable shift in front of them, something that could not be undone or explained away, and the sheriff stood at the center of it, his posture no longer anchored in certainty, but in adjustment, his eyes still on Jada Sterling as if recalibrating everything he thought he understood just minutes ago. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, sharper this time. The voice on the other end no longer distant or unclear, but direct, structured, carrying a tone that did not ask for interpretation. And this time the words were unmistakable. Stand down and disengage. Repeat. Disengage immediately. And the command cut through the air with a finality that removed any remaining ambiguity. The sheriff did not respond right away, but his body did, a subtle shift. His stance loosening, his shoulders no longer squared in assertion, but settling into something more neutral, more responsive. And that single adjustment was enough for everyone watching to understand what had just happened, even if they could not articulate it. A man near the pickup truck let out a low breath and shook his head slightly, while the teenager, with the phone, lowered it just enough to look over the screen directly, as if he wanted to confirm with his own eyes what he had just recorded. And the couple near the door stepped a little closer without realizing it, drawn into the gravity of the moment. Understood, the sheriff finally said into the radio, his voice controlled but undeniably changed, and the word itself carried more weight than anything he had said earlier, because now it was not directing the situation, it was acknowledging it. Jada remained exactly where she was, her presence unchanged, calm, grounded, as if the shift around her was something she had anticipated rather than something she needed to react to. And that stillness continued to define the moment more than any movement could. The sheriff lowered the radio slowly, his hand lingering for a second before releasing it. And when he looked back at her, the dynamic between them had fully reversed, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that required words, but in a way that everyone present could feel, the weight no longer resting on her, but on him. Agent Sterling, he said again, more clearly this time, as if reaffirming what he now understood, and there was no resistance in his tone, no attempt to reclaim what had already been lost, only a controlled recognition of where he stood. Jada gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not as acknowledgement of him, but as acknowledgement that the situation had reached its natural conclusion, and in that gesture there was no triumph, no satisfaction, just closure. The voice on the radio returned once more, softer now, but still firm. Additional units are en route for report documentation. And that statement carried a different kind of weight. Not escalation, not urgency, but process, accountability, the quiet machinery of consequence beginning to move into place. The sheriff's gaze shifted briefly toward the road, as if expecting the arrival even before it happened, and for a moment he said nothing, because there was nothing left to assert, nothing left to question, only something to accept. The people around them began to shift as well, not leaving yet, but adjusting, their attention no longer fixed on conflict but on resolution, on the quiet unraveling of something that had been built too quickly and without foundation. Jada took a slow breath, steady, measured, and turned slightly toward the SUV, not in retreat, not in dismissal, but in continuation, as if the moment, now resolved, no longer required her full attention, and that movement alone reinforced what had already been made clear, that her presence here had never been defined by the situation, only revealed by it. The sheriff remained where he was for a second longer, watching, processing, the weight of the radio command still settling into him, and in that stillness the truth was no longer something that needed to be proven. It had already taken its place, reshaping the scene completely, leaving behind not noise, not chaos, but something quieter, something more final, the unmistakable presence of consequence arriving exactly where it was meant to. The first set of flashing lights appeared at the edge of the road, not with urgency, but with presence. Two dark vehicles pulling in with controlled precision, their movement quiet but unmistakable. And as they rolled to a stop near the gas station, the shift that had already taken place became visible to everyone watching, not just felt. The sheriff turned slightly toward the arrival, his posture tightening again, but not in authority this time. In awareness, in recognition of a process now larger than him. And the door of the lead vehicle opened with a measured pace. A man in a dark suit stepping out, followed by another, both composed, both focused, their attention moving immediately toward Jada Sterling without hesitation, without confusion, as if they had already been briefed, already aligned. The crowd parted slightly without being asked, not out of fear, but out of instinct, making space for something they now understood carried a different kind of weight, and the teenager who had been recording lowered his phone completely, watching now with his full attention, because whatever this was, it was no longer just a moment. It was something unfolding with consequence. The first agent approached Jada and gave a brief nod, professional, respectful, no words needed, and she returned it just as simply. The exchange small but precise, confirming everything that had already been revealed without needing to repeat it. The sheriff remained where he was, his radio silent now, his presence no longer central but still part of the frame. And as the second agent turned slightly toward him, there was no confrontation, no raised voice, just a measured acknowledgement, the kind that comes with protocol, not emotion. "We will take it from here," the agent said, his tone calm, structured, and that sentence did not challenge the sheriff. It repositioned him, placing him exactly where he now stood within the situation. And for a moment he nodded, once, controlled, accepting what had already been made clear. Jada stepped back toward her vehicle, her movement unhurried, her attention no longer anchored to the tension that had defined the last several minutes. And as she reached for the door handle, she paused, just briefly, turning her head slightly toward the sheriff, not to confront, not to linger, but to speak once more, her voice steady, composed, and unmistakably clear. "You did not stop a suspect," she said, each word landing without force but carrying weight all the same. "You followed a narrative." And the sentence did not accuse, it clarified. It placed the moment into its true context without raising it, without dramatizing it. The sheriff held her gaze for a second, then lowered his eyes slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to assert, only something to understand. Jada opened the door of the SUV and paused one last time, her hand resting lightly against the frame, and for a brief moment the entire scene seemed to settle around her. The agents, the bystanders, the quiet hum of the gas station returning slowly to its normal rhythm. And in that stillness she spoke again, not louder, not sharper, but final. "Authority is not what you say," she said, her tone even, grounded. "It is what you can prove when no one knows who you are." And with that she stepped into the vehicle, the door closing with a soft, controlled sound that carried more finality than any raised voice could have. The agents remained for a moment longer, speaking quietly with the sheriff, the process continuing without spectacle, without noise, just structure, just consequence, and the people who had gathered began to disperse slowly, not rushed, not chaotic, but thoughtful, each of them carrying a version of what they had just witnessed. The teenager looked down at his phone, then back up at the scene, as if deciding whether what he recorded could ever fully capture what it felt like to stand there in that moment. And the couple near the door exchanged one last glance before stepping inside, their conversation already shifting from assumption to reflection. The sheriff stood where he was for a second longer, then exhaled quietly, the weight of the moment settling into him not as something loud or immediate, but as something that would stay, something that would replay. And as the vehicles began to move again and the gas station returned to its ordinary rhythm, the truth of what had happened remained, not in the noise, not in the spectacle, but in the silence that followed, the kind that does not need to announce itself to be understood.